My name is Joshua Hauf, and I am the Community Resilience Coordinator at Rethos. We are a historic preservation nonprofit based out of St. Paul, Minnesota. And as a historic preservation nonprofit, we're of course very keen on keeping our buildings out of the landfill. So I'm thrilled to have been working with Melissa to coordinate this webinar and thrilled to show off the great findings coming out of the University of Minnesota. So Melissa and I are both members of Build Reuse's membership and programming committee, and we put on different events, mostly virtual, like this webinar here. So today's webinar is designed to share the findings of research taking a close look at the financial costs of landfilling building materials. But throughout the presentation, and certainly after today, I encourage you all to think about, of course, the non-financial value of the building materials that comprise our built environment, and to take a closer look at what's being wasted. So from a cultural standpoint, many demolitions are, of course, older structures. This makes sense as buildings age, they become more expensive to maintain and become targets for redevelopment. With that demolition, of course, and in a different way, that piece of history is lost. If that building is important to a community, that's stories and that community connection is lost to that built space when demolition is the alternative or the pathway forward. And of course, landfilling all of these materials is a significant value loss for the secondhand market. There's definitely some tender love and care that needs to happen for reuse market development, but there's certainly a growing number of consumers who prioritize older items. We see at Rethos whether that decision's made from a sustainability standpoint, whether people are looking for era-accurate replacement. So if they have like a 1960s kitchen and need like a 1960s cabinetry set, we still have some and people can purchase those on the secondhand market instead of them being lost to the landfill. So while it's certainly not commonplace quite yet, again, these markets are growing and can benefit greatly from the access to these reclaimed materials. We're big believers if you can't move it. So like a lot of what we see is when something needs to be torn down, it's demolished. So we're proponents of course, keeping where it is, maintaining it in the long term. But there's also really exciting work coming out of just picking up the house and moving it. A technique that's been around for a while, but definitely getting some steam in Hennepin County as they are funding some programs to help do that to keep entire buildings out of the landfills. So these changes aren't easy. They certainly aren't cheap, and they're not faster than mechanical demolition, but as you'll hear today, it's an investment that's needed and definitely gets some strong proponents across sustainability sectors. So if you're interested in learning more about Build Reuse and how we elevate and accelerate the work being done across the nation to promote material circularity, just reach out to Melissa and I at the end of the webinar. We'll put some links in the chat, and we hope you learned something.
Great. Thank you for that introduction, Josh. It's been such a pleasure to work with Josh and others at Rethos in focusing on historic preservation and reuse of buildings. That doesn't stop the rhetorical questions of, well, what is the cost comparisons? What are the differences between these material management methods? And so I'm Melissa Wenzel. I'm the Built Environment Sustainability Administrator at the University of Minnesota. And I actually had a capstone course when I was at the U of M, very similar to what these students did, though I didn't get to pick mine. So that's a big difference, is these students get to actually select which projects they want to work on. And I've been mentoring college students since I was a college student myself, something that I feel very strongly about. So when I happened to come across an opportunity to actually get connected, this is 3.5 years ago that I happened to get an email forwarded to me by a connection at the University of Minnesota for the concept of being a host site or a program sponsor for a question or a problem that we're trying to solve. So for the first 2 years, we've been focusing on the differences between demolition and deconstruction or building remodel. Can we reuse the building instead of tearing it down and building new? So that's what the students before this year's students were focusing on. We do have those reports, those final reports, available for you to view on the Build Reuse Wikipedia. But for this particular year, we chose a different focus. What is the true cost of landfilling building materials? I do tend to say building materials instead of construction and demolition because those terms, especially as a single term, tend to have kind of a single assumed and disposal method for it. And so if we're going to try to focus on reuse of building and building materials, we have to reuse different words. So I've actually been using the word destruction for demolition because it really is demolishing and unable to be able to use those products again. So can we have building removal happen? Can we have reuse as a higher and better use of these materials? So we understand that you have to demolish products and destroy them to not be used again, but can we have that as a last resort? So in order to do that, we have to focus on what that actual true cost is. And so this idea got accepted by the Pollution Control Agency management, by Natalie and her team, her faculty and staff at the University of Minnesota. And then students get to hear a bunch of different projects and get to select them. So for that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Natalie.
Hi, everyone. Thank you. Could you progress the slides? One more, please. So hello, everyone. Thank you all for coming. It's really exciting to see such a great audience, and we're really excited to share with you all the work we've been doing. I'm Natalie Hunt. I'm a teaching assistant professor at the University of Minnesota, and my work involves sustainable systems management, life cycle thinking, systems thinking, and in the major itself, the SSM major, students, their curriculum is guided by the systems thinking approach here. And throughout the process in the major, they take courses to gain analytical and quantitative skills. It's a bit interdisciplinary as well, where they're learning about economics, business, and policy. And so through this, robust toolkit that they're building throughout their undergraduate experience, they understand how different systems interrelate, interact with one another to develop more holistic and effective sustainable solutions to challenges. In this project took place under the senior capstone course. This takes place every spring. It's the culminating experience for SSM undergraduates, where students work in teams to partner with industry, non-governmental organizations, government, community organizations, to effectively help solve a real-world sustainability challenge. Our partners vary from year to year, but we've had the good fortune to work with Melissa for the last 3 or 4 years now, I think it is, through a variety of projects, and it's been such a really rewarding experience, and really great for students to have this real-world experience. Of course, all this work is guided through a sustainability lens, where we're approaching and incorporating environment, the economics, and the social aspects of a problem, because there's no one single approach in effective sustainable solutions. And so the students come out of this experience having taken a breadth of courses across disciplines, and then some experience working on a real-world sustainability challenge. And so I'm going to hand it over to Ana today, who was the in our capstone course project team this year, and she will talk about the project they worked on. So thank you so much.
Hi, I'm so glad to see so many faces here, and just really excited to be able to present this work to you guys. And again, just thankful that you guys expressed so much interest in this project. So a little bit about me. My name is Ana Figueroa. As Natalie said, I just graduated from the U of M under the Sustainable Systems Management major. I specialized in corporate sustainability. I'm excited to be starting a position in AMPAC this October, doing some energy analysis. And as it was stated before, this project was completed for the SSM capstone. And if we go on to the next page, I can thank my wonderful co-authors. Unfortunately, they weren't able to be here today, but contributed immensely to this project. So Katie Neesham, Russell Williams, Will Badford, and Madeline Kinney. It was great working with them. So a little bit about an introduction to the purpose of this project. So this all started when Melissa posted on her Facebook an inquiry asking the greater community, maybe some of you guys saw it, about what it truly costs to dump waste into the landfill. She really wanted to understand what are those costs associated with, and what is the benefit incurred by society from diverting that space and not using that space in the landfill, and how that is effectively represented in the financial cost of tipping waste in the landfill. So for the purpose of this study, we really wanted to understand the external costs associated with the C&D waste and understand again how they are reflected in the unit cost price of tipping waste into the landfill. And we also wanted to explore the benefits of programs such as in our case study of Becker County, the reuse program, which they launched in 2020. And I'll delve a little bit deeper into that. And then furthermore, a little bit more of a meta goal of this project was to provide a model for other landfills and institutions hoping to perform similar audits. And, hopefully they can continue to expand on this as well. So an introduction to this problem for some of you guys may be a little bit unfamiliar with the whole area subject. So in here we're going to be talking as what I will refer to as C&D waste, because right now that is what it's being looked at is construction and demolition material. Of course, we want to hopefully in the future reframe that as reusable material, and that's a big message of this presentation, as you will see. But for this study, we see that as society currently sees it, we still generate about 569 million tons of what we see as C&D waste in the US. And in 2019, about 1.5 million of those tons could be attributed to the state of Minnesota, which maybe a lot of you guys are currently residing in. To visualize it, this is about 10 average cargo ships. So if you can imagine a cargo ship, pretty big, transport things from country to country, and that's about 10 of those ships. Currently, we have a statistic of 70% of waste material ending up in landfills, and I'm sure we can work to reduce that metric and keep materials in circulation. So to also give another perspective of the scale of this area subject is that the C&D materials going into the landfill, it is about twice as much as the general household waste. So the household waste that you interact with, there is a whole nother side of landfills operating where they're working more of these contractual jobs, and they generate twice as much amount of waste. So it's a pretty big and influential part of society today. And it is estimated that 33, and this was a statistic that the lovely Melissa provided for us, about 30% of existing buildings today will be demolished by the year 2050. And that again goes to show the prevalence of this practice today. So for our project, we used Becker County landfill up in northern Minnesota, highlighted over here on the left with an orange county and a star specifically for the landfill. This landfill, here's a little bit of a background information on it. It provides services such as the municipal solid waste, which is the garbage cans that you guys leave out at the end of your driveways, a transfer station where they kind of sift and sort through materials, the demolition landfill, recycling, a couple of other programs. And so specifically highlighting for this study, the demolition landfill and the waste and diversion waste and reuse program. And for the timeline of this landfill, it was permitted in 1972, but the land was finally purchased in 1987. the construction and demolition portion of this landfill began operations in 1993. And in 2020, a recent development is that they partnered with Better Futures Minnesota to create a waste diversion program, which is a big center focus of our discussion today. And then in 2037, it is the expected closure date of this facility, or this section of the facility. So, as I previously mentioned, the Becker County has a reuse program. And what this reuse program does is it salvages materials from the landfill and also takes in donations and gives them a platform to be resold and reintegrated for Utah use in people's homes or in buildings, keeping them out from the landfill. And this program generates some profit for the landfill. So that's one of the benefits that it can. It's giving it extra revenue. It also has a social profit of providing jobs for the people of Becker County. One of the significant programs that they've partnered with is the Better Futures Minnesota. What they do is they hire people who have recently been released from prison and provide them a means of obtaining employment. And when someone is released from prison, that is a really important part, because if a person is able to easily find a job, it helps reduce recidivism rates, which is the reincarceration of these individuals. And it also helps them provide a wage that can help them continue to establish themselves and find security for themselves. And a final benefit of this program is that it reduces the amount of materials going into the landfill, therefore reducing the amount of space that these materials are using in the landfill. But not only that, also reducing the amount of materials that need to be produced within communities. So I want to introduce you guys to the method of how we analyzed the true cost, or what we're referring to in this study as the true cost of dumping waste into the landfill. So we can go on to the next page. That's okay. It's not a good presentation without a couple of technical difficulties. Okay, so what our first step was, we wanted to visualize the system of Becker County. So this was done through rigorous discussion with Melissa, as well as a very important collaborator, which was Steve Skoog of Becker County. He's the administrator, and he provided us a lot of insight about how his landfill operates. So we discussed amongst each other about what goes into the landfill, what costs can we quantify for this landfill? And following that, we created a diagram to reflect what it is that we're accounting for in this landfill. So this is a system description. At the center, we have Becker County Landfill, and this is a little animated slide, so we can continue pressing tab once. So here we have what is going into the landfill. We have operation materials and services, which of course incur an expense for the landfill. But these are the materials going in and helping process the material. We have tipping fee revenue, some of that reuse revenue that I was talking to you guys about, labor, land, and of course the materials going into the landfill. So here we see that those materials, the construction or the construction and destruction material, it also produces some greenhouse gas emissions during the production of these materials. So this is specifically when they are being produced in factories. And then this next animation shows the outputs of the landfill. So one of the important outputs is this gainful employment that the community gains from having this landfill operating in their community, people having employment. We have land acquisition expenses also coming out from the Becker County's accounts book, operation expenses, post-care expenses, and then we also have end-of-life greenhouse gas emissions. So in a general municipal solid waste landfill, the ones where you're throwing your banana peels and getting picked off the curb, they usually generate some type of methane. And so that is a good way to describe what these end-of-life emissions are. They're the emissions that happen after you have discarded of the product. And that those emissions again generate an external cost to society, or specifically what the EPA refers to as the social cost of carbon. So when carbon is emitted into the air, it of course can it has an impact on the climate. And as we've seen with climate change, there are a lot of expenses incurred, such as changes in insurance, the insurance expenses, or changes in human health, damage to property. And so those are the expenses that this social cost of carbon accounts for. And this next animation shows specifically the cost that we're accounting for into our equation. So keep an eye out for operation expenses, external cost to society, or the cost of carbon expenses, the land acquisition expense, and the post-care expense. So these are the costs that we will be reflecting in our true tipping cost. So for operation expenses, again, Steve, he provided us the income and expenses ledger for the landfill for the years 2007 and 2023. So we had a good time frame. And we've singled out the expenses relevant to the construction or C&D operations of the landfill. And then for those years, we had to adjust for inflation. So we used data from the US Bureau of Statistics to do that. And then once we were able to get all those expenses for all those years in 2023 dollars, we averaged them to obtain an average yearly expense. So that's specifically the method for how we found operation costs or operation expenses. This is our next method for estimating the cost of the carbon emissions generated by the landfill. So again, Steve providing us with so much amazing data. He gave us information, the annual reports of the landfill, and they reported in that landfill, in that report, we were able to find the annual amount of the annual volume of waste going into the landfill. We used, so in order to get those into specific materials to be able to attribute or account for how different materials generate different emissions, we used a study done by Melissa in 2020, Melissa and her group, for the construction and demolition materials composition study. Some of you guys may be familiar with that. And we used data from the neighboring Polk County, which is shares a border with Becker County and has about a similar size. So we used their information about the composition of, say, metals, papers, concrete, and we applied that to the overall volume of the Becker County landfill to estimate or create an estimate of how much of different materials are going into that landfill. And then we did some more calculations, added a compaction factor as the data reported an uncompacted factor, and then we entered this data into the very useful waste reduction model provided by the EPA. And feel free to continue sending in questions, and I'll love to address them at the end of the presentation. But again, very open to questions because I love this discussion. And so, yes, the worm model, the next page provides a little bit of an insight of what the worm model is. And I'm sure many of you guys are familiar with it, but for those of you who guys aren't, it's a very useful tool, very, very useful that is released to the public by the EPA, and it uses a Excel format to help calculate different comparisons between waste management methods. So it helps generate estimates of energy savings, as saying here, but specifically for our study, it helps generate an estimate of how many greenhouse gas emissions different waste management methods use, and it helps provide a comparison between the two. And so, again, it accounts for the carbon intensity of different materials, and it can model different waste management methods. Specifically, we're focusing in our study for source reduction, recycling, and landfill. And so for using WARM, for this study, we used it to model 3 scenarios, or to model 3 scenarios. And so our first scenario, we assumed that all the volume going into the Becker County was being landfilled. For the second scenario, we try to maximize the amount of materials sorted into recycling. Again, this is a what's the word? A modeled scenario. So this isn't it's not what's currently occurring, but it's what we're creating a model of what emissions would look like if this happened. And this last one, we modeled the emissions of the reuse program's 2023 volumes. So that helps us provide an insight and answers to Melissa's question of what are the benefits in financial terms of this program. And so the EPA swarm model helps give us an estimate of how many emissions. And in order to translate that into financial terms, we used their other metric or figure of $190 per ton of CO2 emissions, social cost of carbon. And again, that social cost of carbon accounts for damages caused by one metric ton of carbon released into the environment. And so now that we've seen how we calculate the operations cost, the yearly operations cost, and the cost of carbon for a year operations worth of the landfill, we're going to see how that goes into our equation for the final true tipping cost of the landfill. So as you can see in this equation on the right, we have stands for the lifespan of the landfill, and so we're multiplying the lifespan of the landfill by those yearly expenses, and then we're including those singular expenses that are attributed to the landfill, which is the initial landfill cost and the post-closure cost in this scenario. And then to get it into a metric of how is this reflected in tipping cost, the tipping cost is usually reflected in cubic yards. So the tipping fee is divided by the total ultimate capacity of the cubic yard. So on the top, on the numerator, we have a sum of all the expenses, and in the bottom, we have it divided by the volume of the landfill. And a little bit about how we acquired those initial and post-closure costs. Those were also given in the annual reports, again, provided to us by Steve. And these figures were also adjusted to 2023 values. And so the final part of our program after we find that tipping cost is understanding how the reuse program can help remedy that big cost to society. And so 2020 was the first year of this program, and we used 2023 data, our most insightful data set with a lot of important details such as material type labels and to generate our estimates. And we inputted, so this material was given to us in weight already, so it was easy to input into WARM, which again, as I'll remind the audience, WARM uses mass, but then we also converted for this part of our analysis, we converted that mass to volume using densities so that we can get a good visual, and it can be a very tangible visual for us to understand how much material this program is diverting. And so now here we go to the culmination of our results. which I'm so excited to share. And I'm sure Melissa's so excited for everyone to hear. So we have our operation cost. 1 year of operating the landfill is about $420,000. And as you can see in this right diagram, this is a broad, in broad strokes, a visual of how expenses are incurred by this landfill. So you see that disposal and transportation is one of the biggest expenses. It is the biggest expense. The next largest expense is the capital outlay. And so those are yearly, like very fixed costs that the landfill incurs, such as like property value or property taxes and just very fixed costs. And then the next one is salaries and wages. So that $420,000 per year is reflected in those services in the landfill. And so that will play into our tipping cost. So now here's another important value that we got, and this is the amount this is the financial reflection or the economic dollar value reflection of how much these emissions cost. So in the end of the landfill, we have the materials going into the landfill have a wonderful, if anyone's aware of the life cycle analysis, where we see how different portions of the life cycle of materials generate different, different effects. So how much different parts of a material can use energy, use water, or generate emissions. And so for these materials, we're specifically focusing on the production stage of the materials, as well as the end of life. And mind you, there's also there's so much you can do with also the actual use, but of those materials and the emissions associated with that. But for this, we're focusing on the production life part of the material, as well as the end of life. The end of life are those emissions generated post disposal. And in this case, we see that it generates in the construction and demolition landfill about $21,000 per year. And that again is from the use of gas of transporting materials in the landfill, as well as maybe some minor methane emissions from the decomposing organic materials such as wood. And then, as we can see in this left graphic, we have a visual of emissions from landfilling in black and emissions from production in gray. And if you guys can see, the emissions from production are significantly larger. The emissions from production increase the price to over $2 million per year in the materials that we're sending into the landfill. And so a big point to emphasize is that about 99% of emissions from the materials that go into landfill are generated during its production when comparing end of life and production. And so for modeling recycling, those $2 million of emissions from production still remain, and recycling reduces the social cost of carbon by about $873,000. If you look to the graphic on the right, we can see that recycling is useful in materials such as aluminum, steel, and copper. But something to note is that at the end of the day, when you take the emissions from avoided from or reduced from recycling and the emissions from landfilling, producing that material, it never fully offsets that material. So recycling will always generate in this case, it always generates a surplus of emissions. And so our final costs going into our equation are the initial and post-closure cost. The cost of the initial acquisition of the land in today's dollars is about $74,000. And the average estimated post-closure care cost is about $601,000. And that is an account put aside for well monitoring services and ground testing services, making sure that once that material is in the ground, it's not damaging the environment or the community. And our final calculation, or actually our final two calculations, is the expected closure date. We estimated that to be 2037, again from data given in the annual reports, and as well as data given from the annual reports informed us that the ultimate capacity of the landfill is about 491,000 cubic yards, and that will go in the denominator of our equation. I believe this next page is how we assemble the true cost of the landfill. So over here we have on the right, we have our two equations. Our first equation reflects the cost with just end-of-life emissions. So we have the 21,000 generated from the end-of-life carbon emissions, and that would give us about $46 per cubic yard. Mind you, our annual reports on average informed us that on average the landfill charged about $9 per cubic yard as a tipping fee. So that's a significant increase when just accounting for the end of life. And we see that when we include in that second equation the emissions generated from the production of those materials, and so that $2 million value, that cost to society of producing those materials and tipping and throwing them into the landfill increases to $250 per cubic yard. So imagine whatever building you're in right now, and imagine a cubic yard of materials within the room that maybe you're in right now, or the closest building that you're in. 1 cubic yard of those materials is about $250 incurred to society in emissions. And so at the end of the day, those are again cost to human health and changes in society and damage to property from those emissions that those materials made when they were being produced. And so here we go into how our reuse program is curbing some of the costs of these emissions. Our reuse program today, from the end of life, again, the end of life don't contribute very much to those emissions. So from diverting the volume, the amount of volume that the reuse program diverted, it reduced the cost to society of those end-of-life emissions by $64, which may not look very significant, but once you look at the reduction in social cost of carbon from reducing the production of new materials needed to replace those old materials, that social cost is reduced by $12,000. And again, this is a very, very new project and it's still growing. And so that's definitely been it's a big impact. And I'm sure that the people at the landfill who are working to divert these materials, that's a very important figure. And as you can see, some important materials that are being processed at the reuse program are specifically metal, plastic, glass, and lumber. So those are all materials that don't need to be generated again in factories and can be reintegrated into society. And so at that second part of the method section, the first part I was going to talk about cost, and this is what it is in volume. The reuse program, it generates about 33.7 tons. It processed about 33.7 tons in 2023. And it was able to generate a revenue of $21,000 for the landfill, which again helps bring in some revenue for the landfill. And so in 2023, when converted, those 33 tons converted into volume, it's about approximately 190 cubic yards. And now I wanted to find a way to make this very communicable and very, very visually understandable for all of us who are visual people. And so this picture on the right shows a Denko dump truck. These trucks are used to transport materials into construction sites. So say this would be filled with gravel or sand, right? And it can hold, I want to say, about 42 cubic tons, something close to that. But using the volume capacity of this truck, we were able to estimate that in 2023, the reuse program at Becker County processed almost 8 of these trucks. So imagine 8 of these trucks lined up, 8 of these trucks lined up in a parking lot, and that's how much material the Becker County reuse program was able to divert. And some over the lifespan of this landfill, as you guys know, we were able to estimate when the closure date of this landfill is. In earnings, it would generate the landfill about $276,000, which is about a year's worth of expenses, or half a year's worth of expenses. And in those 13 years, again, this would be about 2,470 cubic yards, or about 102 of these side dump trucks. So that would fill up a lot of parking lots in these dump trucks. And so why does this matter? I think, as Josh noted, this matters because the emissions from these communities emissions from these materials are impacting communities. And we can go on to the next page. It matters because, again, the production, as you guys saw in those charts, production generates significantly higher amount of emissions than the end of life. And so keeping materials in use reduces the demand for the need of production of new materials. Also, it is a big opportunity to further develop programs like the reuse program because it keeps materials in circulation. And so again, it reduces that need to produce new materials. And it also extends the lifespans of our landfill by reducing the amount of materials going into the landfill. And that again reduces cost to society needing to produce new landfills and find new spaces to throw our trash in. Again, these programs and landfills provide meaningful work for our community members. I think one thing that me and Natalie were discussing is that when people work and they know that their work is doing something good, they feel very, very much a lot more satisfied and pleased with the jobs that they're doing. And this reuse program was really great because, as you guys saw, we had a lot of data from annual reports. There was also data from land surveys, as well as data that Becker County actively chose to keep and to go out of their way to get data about the materials that they were processing through the reuse program. And that really helped us understand the impacts and the positive impacts that this reuse program is having. So this also is an emphasis for other landfills and understanding and the importance of them keeping good records, and because it helps us really understand the impact that the programs that they initiate have. And so our final page is a special thanks to, and a great big special thanks to Steve Skoog, because he was the administrator and he was very, very open to providing us this data. Truly a groundbreaker and allowing us to generate these numbers. Melissa, who of course had the inception of this idea, thank you so much. Just, that was a great question. She found a gap in knowledge within the community of really understanding how it is that the cost of these materials, it impacts society. And then everybody at the University of Minnesota, Natalie has been so great, especially over this summer, and helping me arrange these materials and allowing me to bring it to you guys. It's really great to see that so many of you guys showed up and really cared about this and really getting these numbers out to you guys. and I really hope that they can have a useful impact, and be a useful metric and tool for you guys to continue doing all the amazing work that you're doing. We had Jin, he was our assistant professor, recently promoted to a tenured professor, so we're so happy for him. And Patrick, he is he teaches, I believe, specifically about building sustainability, and so he was also a big help in bouncing back and forth our ideas with him. And so that concludes my presentation, and I'm so excited to get over to questions. I see there are a lot of questions. And again, if you guys want to shout out questions, feel free. And if for right now, I can as well start reading off some of these questions. So, is the landfill publicly or privately owned? The landfill I believe it's not a state landfill. I think Melissa may be able to answer that question a little bit more, but it does receive revenue from the state in it's called a special assessment revenue, in which they designate who has to pay for the services of the landfill.
It is publicly owned. Becker County owns it as part of their solid waste campus.
Perfect. What does the miscellaneous category encompass? A quarter of all costs. Yes, Emily, that is a great question. So in order to make the visuals very understandable to the public and not have a million little divisions, the miscellaneous, we grouped the 5 largest categories, and then, well, the 4 largest categories, and then all the other expenses were grouped into that miscellaneous expense. So it can be such as, I think they're called per diem costs, where when workers go out and they incur expenses. So it's just all the other expenses incurred by the landfill, and they were grouped in miscellaneous expense to make the graphic a little bit easier to understand. And how many acres is the landfill? That is not a question I know, or an answer I know off the top of my head.
I found it actually a little difficult to get that answer too, because capacity can change. You can build up or you can build over or down. And so there is on the end report sort of what the initial capacity is versus what has been filled up. And I don't have that number handy either. It's a fairly small landfill compared to other C&D landfills, particularly private landfills. We can certainly get that information. It's on several end reports. I just don't have that handy.
Yes, I believe they'll probably be on the land assessments.
And I think this question will be answered soon, but I just wanted to say that there is a final report that Ana and Natalie are refining, where all of this data will be included. So that'll be shared very shortly.
All right, moving on to Lillian's question. What type of recycling process was modeled for each C&D material? Okay, that is a great question. I would say that goes into how the WARM model estimates those emissions. I know that for modeling that, there are a couple of sections, one that says like recycling and one that says landfill. And if the material could be recycled, we input that into the recycling, all those materials into the recycling. So that's how we modeled that, is we input all the materials that could be recycled as recycled. But as for how the WARM model accounts for different recycling processes, I'm sure that they take, say for glass, the most prevalent methods of recycling glass, and maybe uses a couple of conversion factors to understand how the average impact of those recycling processes. But that is definitely something I would encourage you to go on the EPA site and investigate a little bit more about how their WARM model works, if I wasn't able to fully answer your question. And Annika, okay. What does it mean for the reuse program to have managed a product? Does that necessarily mean that the product made it into an end use, or just that it was salvaged and put onto the warehouse floor for resale? Perfect. Great question. I also was thinking about this from time to time. So we had a log of all the sales done by the reuse program. We had the amount, the dollar value that the material was sold for, and how much it weighed. So from my understanding, I believe that those were materials sold.
And real quick, just to supplement your answer, I believe that the reuse program also, removes it from the waste stream, does put it in a warehouse to be sold. I believe some of the materials are also repurposed. I remember one of our team members talking about how some of maybe the lumber materials used to, make benches or other finished products that can be sold as well.
Yes, so they're definitely repurposed. And also, I remember one thing is that once it's in that reuse program, those materials can't just be thrown away back into the C&D landfill, because only contractual jobs can throw materials into the C&D landfill, and I believe it operates more as a business. Do markets already exist in the area for reusing, recycling these material streams? Or do they have to be developed? I believe, and again, feel free, Melissa or Natalie, to come in at any time. But from what I remember, people were very willing in the community to come in and participate into that landfill. So
It's been positive on both the supply materials to the landfill and buy materials. So they've had routine sales regularly. They have regular hours throughout the week, and they'll have periodic quarterly sales. Demand and supply is always a challenge, but I think this concept of the diversion reuse program is about 20 years in the making. And so there was very likely some assessments done to determine that something like this would be helpful. One thing that I think Becker County didn't realize is that contractors would take their surplus materials and bring them straight to the diversion reuse program. So all of a sudden, you're now taking materials that would have ended up as waste, still perfectly usable, and instantly being diverted versus kind of gone to the landfill and then maybe pulled out or stopped from disposal. So a lot of contractors are working directly with the diversion reuse program for their surplus materials. So it's been really great. People really want to have that material reused or used for the first time in the case of surplus from contractors. Give them a means to do so and people will support it. The costs are low enough for the materials, the turnover is quite high. So they're a public organization. They're not trying to make a profit. They're trying to move material regularly.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your input. Melissa, again, very, very knowledgeable in all these projects, and she works very closely with the people that she passionately works with. Okay, this question by Ryan, I see, Natalie, you answered, but I do want to touch on this because this shows how much potential, like the potential to expand on this project. So Ryan, you asked about how other hazards from these waste management methods can be financially or economic or dollar valued. So such as maybe you're talking about particulate matter emissions, really small particulate P2.5 emissions, or contaminations to maybe groundwater. And that is, again, it goes to show that we were only able to quantify a small scope of the amount of emissions associated with operating or with the practice of throwing materials into a landfill. I mean, we are always looking for creative ways to assess maybe the financial cost to, again, other external costs of these landfills. So we were only able, for this landfill and with the data that we had and the time frame that we had, account for the social cost of carbon. But I would love to see if someone is able to maybe do a water assessment cost, or again that particulate matter, and you know, especially people with maybe a little bit more technical savvy, which would love to learn as well. Going out and testing maybe air quality of those materials, or even doing an economic analysis of jobs created and how the job market is impacted in the reuse program. Any additional comments from you guys, Melissa, Natalie, Josh?
I just wanted to add too, yeah, unfortunately, we get started on these capstone projects and they're only a semester long, and we often find ourselves just, hungry to want to do more with what we're learning so far. And so, in an ideal world, these projects would kick off longer, more longitudinal, more robust studies where students can really maybe monitor, collect data, that kind of thing. So
well, and who knows, maybe this will spur some sort of master's or PhD project for students at the University of Minnesota or anywhere else in the world.
Yeah, or projects, maybe it inspires any of the individuals here. And yes, Mary, I don't want to butcher your last name, Takak. I hope that was a good attempt. Yeah, again, those health costs, we would love to see if creative ways to assess those objectively in financial terms. And again, opportunity to expand on these.
I do know there are folks in our department, Dr. Jason Hill does work with evaluating the human health damages as a result of exposure to different forms of air pollution. But I don't think that work has extended to specifically landfills, but there is a great deal of work out there having to do with kind of production emissions, in the agricultural sector and the energy and transportation sector. But yes, to sort of focus those methods into the waste management sector, very interesting.
I think maybe we can get through one more question. Okay, there's two more questions that I really, really want to answer. So how does the Becker County assess their $9 cubic yard cost? So the most recent cubic yard cost, so remember the $9 was an average. The most recent, I believe, was around $12. I believe, and this is again why we want to publish this work, because we'd love to hear feedback from different people with different expertises. People with a great expertise in economics and finance can give us a little bit more insight about how maybe say depreciation, inflation, and all those values help the facilities financial department determine that $9 per cubic yard value. This was our best attempt, and definitely an opportunity for us as well as for the entire community to grow and challenging these questions and facing them. And then Ellie, oh sorry.
I was just going to say, and part of it is probably revenue divided by materials landfill too, to some extent. There's probably more complexity behind it and not just a simple calculation, but at least that's a foundation, I would imagine.
Yep. And then there's also, we need to understand that sometimes there's some gaps in our knowledge. And so some data may be missing, and that data can have a significant impact on the analysis of these results. And that's just, great about the academic and academic paper community and not everybody involved, just constantly giving feedback and revising. And so we can find a better understanding of our systems. And then this last one I really wanted to address was the one from Ellie. Thank you so much for giving us your question. Is there any plans on working with the White Earth Nation, who is also in Becker County on this land? I don't really have a question of that, but I do want to address this question because it is very important to note that there is a pretty big reservation known as the White Earth Nation Reservation within Becker County. And so the impacts that that this landfill has on its community can very much deeply impact them. I'm sure we're not actively right now working with the Becker County City Council or any representatives of that county, but we would love to hear their insights and inputs as well, because we definitely believe here in and within this community, that as many voices and as much representation as we can get gives us a better understanding and better insight about how to face these problems. And so, yes, it's 12 o'clock. I'll let Melissa, Josh, and Natalie go ahead and close up the discussion. Just thanking everybody for being here, and it's really great to see the outreach that this has had.
Yeah, just in closing, thank you all for attending. We know that people wanted to join and couldn't make it today. I'll have this recording available on our Build Reuse YouTube channel this afternoon, and we'll share it out at least to those that RSVP'd or expressed interest in some way. So any follow-up questions can go straight to Natalie. Her email address is in the chat, and we thank you all for your time today. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
And feel free to stick around, and for any questions, if anyone can stick around, I'll be free to have a discussion. But yeah, thanks again. Oh, I see Steve here.
Steve. And thank you enough.
Hello?
Hi, Steve.
Steve.